What if we could capture all of the excess greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and stop climate change? That's more or less the pitch for carbon capture, one of the hottest fads in the climate change conversation over the last decade or so. But while carbon capture technology has come a long way, and will surely play a role in helping us mitigate the climate crisis, it's unfortunately not the answer to all of our problems. Carbon capture describes a set of technologies that, in some cases, filters out CO2 from industrial emissions as they're happening, and in other cases, extracts pre-existing CO2 directly from the atmosphere. That CO2 then either gets repurposed for some industrial use, or is safely stored somewhere, usually deep within the earth. Carbon capture is a very appealing solution to the emissions problem, because in theory, it means we don't need to change anything about the way we're currently living. We'll just filter the harmful CO2 out of emissions as we create them, and then pull all of the pre-existing CO2 out of the air. As you can imagine, it's an especially appealing solution to fossil fuel companies, and has become the industry's silver bullet to the climate crisis. Not only does carbon capture theoretically exonerate the industry from having to change their lucrative business model, in some cases it actually increases output. This is because the majority of CO2 that gets captured and stored today actually gets used by fossil fuel companies. For decades, oil companies have employed the practice of injecting stored CO2 back into depleted oil reserves to extract more oil from those reserves. So the technology that's supposed to be cleaning up our mess is actually enabling more mess. But the real problem is that carbon capture just isn't feasible at the scale that its biggest supporters are advocating. The process of carbon capture itself requires energy, and the International Energy Agency projects that if demand for fossil fuels continues on the trajectory laid out by current policies, by 2050 the energy needed to power all of the carbon capture operations necessary to keep emissions on track to meet global goals would exceed the total energy demand of the entire world today. That's right, capturing all of the carbon we'd need to in 2050 would require more energy than it takes to power all of Earth in 2024. And until we transition to totally clean energy sources, all that energy is just going to contribute more emissions. That's why many experts advocate that while carbon capture is an enticing prospect, it makes more sense to invest time and research into transitioning away from energy sources that produce emissions in the first place, rather than in figuring out ways to clean up the emissions that we continue to produce. But even if we completely stopped producing emissions today, we'd still need to remove some of the CO2 that is already building up in the atmosphere to reduce the impacts of warming. That's where direct air carbon capture will come in. Like I said before, it's not that carbon capture isn't going to be part of the solution to the climate crisis. It just can't be our whole solution.